A woman served coffee to a gentleman accompanied by his dog directly in front of the health inspector. Her supervisor maintained a calm demeanor without raising his voice or displaying anger, just delivering a cold, decisive verdict. Your employment ends here, Grace. 6 years of dedicated service vanished with those few words. She remained composed, removing her apron with unsteady hands before departing, not for violating regulations, but for defending a military veteran and his service animal. Grace remained, unaware that the entire incident had been recorded. And before the cafe's morning customers arrived, the earth began to tremble. 4 military vehicles entered the parking area, and a Marine colonel emerged wearing full ceremonial uniform, a man whose life had once been saved by the very veterans she protected. In that instant, everything transformed. Grace Donnelly wasn't someone who immediately caught people's attention, yet she left lasting impressions. At 35, she operated the Mason Mug Cafe, situated on downtown Mason, Georgia's outskirts. Merely 15 minutes from Fort Granger, one of the Southeast's most extensive Marine installations, the community resembled a Norman Rockwell illustration with oak-bordered walkways, stars and stripes adorning every third residence, and a hardware shop unchanged since Reagan's presidency. However, the Cafe SACSACSE felt distinct more welcoming and compassionate. Grace managed it not as a commercial enterprise, but as a sanctuary, where people could enter after exhausting days or lengthy deployments and rediscover their humanity. The coffee wasn't elaborate, no specialty drinks or intricate foam designs, just robust, steaming hot with unlimited refills and handwritten messages posted on the bulletin board behind the register. What distinguished the Mason mug wasn't the beverages, it was Grace herself. She recalled names, birthdays, and blackout deployment dates. She knew everyone's egg preferences and who hadn't consumed coffee since returning from Iraq. She created space for quietude, particularly the kind accompanying veterans bearing more than physical wounds. Every Wednesday at precisely 9 o'clock, she conducted what had quietly evolved into a community ritual, Heroes Hour. It began with 3 participants: her father-in-law, Ben Donnelly, a retired Marine drill instructor; Ralph, a Vietnam veteran who seldom spoke but never missed attendance; and Louisa, a former Army nurse whose laughter resembled wind chimes. Gradually, the gathering expanded as Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan veterans from all eras discovered her establishment, attracted more by its proprietor than the menu. Grace consistently opened with identical words. This space exists for visibility, not repair for sitting, not performing. They would acknowledge this. Shoulders relaxing as they enjoyed coffee and exchanged stories, some humorous, others weighty, and some too agonizing for verbal expression. She rarely discussed her personal history, though everyone in town understood the basics. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly, had died in combat 6 years prior in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. His photograph adorned the wall above the cash register, not in military attire, but wearing jeans and flannel, holding a coffee cup outside the cafe's entrance. The image was captured 2 weeks before his final deployment. He never returned home. Grace never remarried or even suggested such intentions. She channeled her grief into the cafe, not to avoid it, but to construct something meaningful from it. People adored her for this, but more importantly, they respected her. Veterans addressed her as ma'am with genuine reverence. Teenagers opened doors without prompting. And even the mayor visited monthly to acknowledge her role in maintaining community cohesion better than most institutions. For Grace, recognition was never the objective, it was about the mission, the quiet one, without medals, but equally significant. Each time she poured coffee for an anxious veteran, unable to sit in crowded spaces, checked on someone staring too long out windows, or allowed dogs to rest under tables without questioning, she followed instinct and love rather than regulations. That Wednesday morning, the one that changed everything, began like all others. The entrance bell chimed softly. Regulars entered, coffee brewed, and the cafe filled with gentle conversation, laughter, and belonging's warm atmosphere. Grace was unaware that by day's end, this small corner establishment would become the Center of a storm reaching Washington, all beginning with a man, a dog, and a woman who refused to surrender. The crisp Wednesday morning arrived with sunlight, appearing cooler. Then its warmth and steam rising from cups like small spirits. Grace worked behind the counter with rolled sleeves and pinned hair, greeting familiar faces with quiet but warm acknowledgments. She had already prepared the first dark roast pot for Hero's Hour and arranged the ceramic mugs, reserved exclusively for veterans. Then Ray McMillan entered with Shadow beside him. Ray was among the newer faces, late 50s, former Marine Corps reconnaissance who spoke little and never lingered, but consistently appeared, which held significance. Shadow, his black lab German shepherd mix, remained within inches of his position, wearing a bright red vest with bold white text, "Service dog do not pet." Grace waved at Ray. "Window table is available," she smiled. He nodded, murmured thanks, and guided Shadow to the distant corner. The atmosphere shifted when the front door opened briskly, admitting a man in a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and an expression seemingly allergic to happiness. He carried a clipboard, like a badge of authority. His name tag read, Logan Prescott, State Health Inspector. Grace hadn't anticipated this visit. She greeted him courteously. "May I assist you with something?" she inquired. "An inspection," he replied curtly. "Announced." He moved through the space with clinical detachment, tapping surfaces, examining labels, opening refrigerator doors. Then he noticed the dog. He halted abruptly as if encountering a barrier. "That animal," he announced loudly, pointing toward. "Shadow violates state health regulations. No animals are permitted where food is served." Conversation stopped and attention turned. Grace stepped from behind the counter, carefully maintaining a calm voice. "He's a registered service dog. Federal law permits his presence here." Prescott frowned, scanning the room as if seeking support. "I don't care about his vest," he snapped. "Animals carry dander, saliva. Hair this creates food hazards. Unless you want this cafe closed, that dog leaves." Ray tensed in his chair, gripping his coffee cup tightly. Shadow remained motionless, simply looking up at Ray and waiting. Silence filled the room. Grace took a measured breath and spoke words she knew were irreversible. "I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're welcome to write your report, but you'll do so knowing you attempted to humiliate a man who served this country in front of the very people he served to protect." Prescott's jaw clenched. From across the cafe, someone muttered, "Absolutely right." But it didn't matter, because now standing in the doorway was another Deborah Lyle, regional manager for the Mason Muggs parent company. Apparently, she had arrived early for a routine check-in, just in time to witness everything. Her eyes were wide, her tone icy. "Grace Donnelly," she declared, "you've just violated direct health compliance policy in front of a state inspector. Pack your belongings, you're terminated." Gasps echoed. A spoon clattered to the floor. Ray stood halfway in shock. Grace didn't move initially. Then she surveyed the cafe, looking at Ray, at Shadow, at the small chalkboard reading Heroes. "Our today's free coffee for vets." She smiled slightly. She untied her apron with trembling fingers, folded it, and placed it on the counter. Then she turned to Alina, the young barista by the espresso machine, and whispered, "Ensure Ray receives his refill." She exited through the side door into morning sunlight as the cafe remained frozen behind her. No one followed, but someone pressed record. Somewhere in the digital realm of phones, social media, and invisible networks, a story had been captured, a quiet act of defiance, a line drawn, a woman terminated not for breaking rules but for refusing to break her principles. Far away, an office filled with military photographs and brass nameplates. Colonel Richard Gaines received a phone call he wouldn't ignore. For 35 minutes, the Mason mug remained silent. Customers whispered. Some left coffee half-finished. Others sat motionless, glancing toward windows as if the wind itself might deliver explanations. But Alina, the young barista Grace had trained, remained at her position. Her hands trembled slightly while pouring Ray's second cup. "I didn't know what to say," she would later admit, "but I knew abandoning that station would disappoint her." Ray sat quietly at his table, untouched cup before him since Grace's departure. Shadow lay curled at his feet, ears twitching but still, as if sensing something had broken in the room. Then it began a low rumble. It's barely audible initially, like distant thunder rolling across Georgia hills. Chairs wobbled. Coffee rippled. The cafe's windows began humming. Customers stood and looked outside. From Main Street's eastern end, through morning mist and maple-lined sidewalks, came from military Humvees, tires growling against pavement. Their lights cut through haze like searchlights. The vehicles entered the lot in slow, deliberate formation. Doors opened simultaneously, and Colonel Richard Gaines emerged, decorated, composed in full Marine Corps dress blues with polished gold buttons and white gloves in hand. His numerous ribbons and impenetrable expression commanded attention. Behind him, 24 Marines followed in formation, their sharp uniforms and unmistakable presence filling the space. They stood at attention on the sidewalk outside the cafe. Inside, no one moved. Inspector Logan Prescott stood frozen near the pastry case, his forgotten clipboard lowered. Deborah Lyell, the regional manager, had paled the shades and stepped back from the counter as if it might burn her. The cafe's bell jingled once as Colonel Gaines entered alone. His boots struck the floor hard and slow, echoing like drum rolls. Through the silence, he stopped in the cafe's center, glancing once at Alina, who swallowed hard, then at Ray, who had slowly risen. Their eyes met. Ray nodded quietly. The colonel returned something even deeper. Salute. That's when Prescott stammered, I didn't know he was. ... Double quotes. The colonel didn't raise his voice. You don't need to know someone's identity to treat them with basic dignity. He turned to Alina. Is Grace Donnelly here? Alina shook her head. She was terminated for defending Mr. McMillan in Shadow. Colonel Gaines's jaw tightened. That woman once served the families of this base better than most agencies combined. She gave my men a place to breathe when they came home speechless. And she treated a decorated Marine with the respect this nation promised him and forgot. Ray cleared his throat, speaking for the first time. She didn't ask questions, he said quietly. She didn't flinch when I entered with a dog. She just poured coffee and provided a place to sit. That was the first time in ages I felt human again. Tears slipped down a woman's cheek near the register. Colonel Gaines nodded, then turned toward the Marines waiting outside. He stepped toward the door and raised his hand in signal. They filed in, orderly, silent, reverent. 2 Marines moved behind the counter and removed the corporate logo from the wall, folding the vinyl panel like a flag. Another replaced the chalkboard. Sign with a new one brought from their vehicle. It read in bold, white hand-painted letters, Welcome to Grace's Houseware. Honor is served daily. When Deborah Lyell attempted to interject, Colonel Gaines looked at her only once. You've made it your decision, he said. Now we'll make ours. Then he stepped outside, phone in hand. A moment later, Elena's phone buzzed. She looked down, confused. It's a direct message from Fort Granger, she said. They've requested Grace report to base headquarters today. Ray exhaled slowly, eyes wide. Shadow stood. And in the cafe, that once held coffee and comfort. Something entirely new was brewing on a reckoning. Grace sat in her truck at her driveway's edge, keys in hand, but engine off. She'd been sitting there for 15 minutes, still in her cafe clothes coffee-stained jeans, her favorite blue flannel, and shoes that had seen more spilled espresso than she cared to count. Grace stared at the road, replaying the morning. Repeatedly. Terminated in front of customers for doing what was right. And now, a message from the base Colonel Gaines would like to meet at Fort Granger headquarters today. She didn't understand what this meant, or if it was positive, but somehow, deep down, she felt the shift. Something larger than her life at the Mason Mug had just begun. Grace took a breath, turned the ignition, and headed down the familiar road she'd driven hundreds of times before. Only this time, she wasn't delivering muffins or coffee canisters. This time, she was entering through the gates. Fort Granger stood like a city of disciplined. Orderly roads and flag-lined avenues, the sound of cadence calls echoing in the background. Grace had been there as a military wife before, but now, walking into the main administration building, She felt like an outsider again. Colonel Richard Gaines met her at the door. He wasn't in dress blues now, just a clean khaki uniform and a calm presence that could command a room with a glance. "Grace," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it, firm but uncertain, still not entirely sure why she was there. "Let me show you something." He led her down a hallway lined with portraits of past commanders, training maps, and commendation plaques. They stopped in front of a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside, the room was filled with folding chairs, whiteboards, and boxes of unused supplies. A few young staffers moved quietly in the corner, setting up therapy mats and arranging donated equipment. "This is a pilot program," he explained. "We've been trying to get it off the ground for 2 years. Trouble is, it's hard to find someone who understands vets not just from paperwork, but from the inside." Grace folded her arms. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree in social work." "No," he said. "But you built a place where men and women with invisible wounds came to heal. You did more with coffee and kindness than some programs do with million-dollar budgets." She didn't answer right away. Colonel Gaines stepped closer, his tone softening. "You created a sanctuary without realizing it. What you did in that cafe, that was leadership. That was service." Then from the back room, a voice called out, "Is that her?" A young woman stepped out mid-20s, long sleeves covering burn scars along her arms and jaw. Her name tag read Tiffany Rios. She walked slowly, a golden retriever puppy beside her wearing a red vest marked in training. "Hi," she said shyly. "I just wanted to say I saw the video of you and the dog and the guy. I haven't been to a coffee shop since I came home, but I think I could sit in a place you run." Grace blinked. The air in her chest shifted. Colonel Gaines smiled. "We'd like to offer you a position, not as a figurehead, not as a name on a brochure, but as the director of this center." Grace exhaled. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," he said. "You'd run the programs, build the space, shape the culture. You already know what works: community, routine, respect." She looked at Tiffany, now kneeling with her dog. She thought of Ray, of Shadow, of the dozens of men and women who'd found their way into the Mason mug, not for lattes, but for peace. And suddenly she knew. "I'll do it," she said quietly. The colonel nodded once. "Then let's get to work." That night, Grace stood, alone in what would soon be the new heart of Fort Granger's outreach efforts. The walls were bare, the floor still scuffed, but the air felt full of something sacred. She reached into her bag and took out an old photomichael. Her husband sitting outside the cafe, his boots up, smiling at her. She pinned it to the wall. No plaque, no frame, just memory and mission. Word spread faster than she imagined. By the end of the week, the Veteran Transition and Wellness Center at Fort Granger wasn't just another military initiative. It had become something alive. Veterans who hadn't stepped foot on base in years showed up. Young soldiers returned with hesitant spouses. Even the local newspaper, the Mason Herald, ran a full-page spread, from CAF to command. How Grace Donnelly is rebuilding trust one cup at a time. Grace didn't do anything flashy. She didn't bring in fancy speakers or consultants. She just did what she'd always done. She paid attention. She asked names and remembered them. She posted a whiteboard near the coffee pot that read, "Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener?" She let dogs curl up in corners of therapy rooms without a fuss. She kept that same handwritten notebook from the cafe and added new pages one. For every vet who walked through the door, some days were quiet. Some were hard. Some were full of nothing but silence and refills. But something powerful was building a space where pain wasn't hidden and healing didn't need to be loud. Ray came often now. Shadow would walk straight to his favorite corner and lie down like he'd always belonged. Tiffany Rios showed up every Tuesday. She wasn't ready to speak in groups yet, but she'd begun sketching, again, images of dogs, hands, and homecomings. And Alina, the young barista from the Mason mug, visited every Friday. She brought coffee, yes, but also laughter. And when Grace needed a second opinion on anything from wallpaper to website wording, Alina was the first to weigh in, but not everyone was thrilled. Some officials questioned why someone with no formal training was running a federal pilot program. Auditors arrived quietly, clipboards in hand, suits stiff with skepticism. They examined logs, asked probing questions, even tested the water filters on the coffee machine at the end of their review. One inspector looked Grace dead in the eye and asked, "What certifications do you hold that qualify you to counsel veterans?" Grace didn't blink. "I don't have certifications," she said softly. "Just consistency and kindness." The inspector didn't respond, but he took notes. A week later, Grace received a formal notice. The wellness center was being reviewed for possible national model expansion. Colonel Gaines called it a victory. Grace just called it humbling. But even as the center grew, the Mason mug still tugged at her heart. One afternoon, she returned quietly, without announcement. Alina was behind the counter. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased, sliding a mug across the counter. "I'm just here for coffee," Grace said, smiling. The cafe had changed. Photos of vets now lined the walls, Ray, Tiffany, and others. A new sign had been hung near. The register. Grace's corner where no one sits alone. Later that day, Grace drove across town to speak at a local fundraiser for veteran families. It was a modest event, mostly older folks and kids with crayon posters. She spoke without notes. "I didn't set out to build a program," she said. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." The crowd fell silent, then applause loud, long, real. And somewhere in the back, Ray stood, his silver star pinned to his chest, and gave her a quiet salute. Back at the center that night, Grace sat alone by the wall of photos. She added one more, a picture of the cafe taken the day after. The Humvees came. People standing shoulder to shoulder, dogs lying under tables, coffee in every hand. No fear, no shame, just connection. Above it, she taped a small card that read, "Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves, it's what we protect in others." And in that stillness, Grace understood. The cafe hadn't closed. It had simply moved. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, a letter arrived. It came in a sealed envelope stamped with the gold emblem of the Department of Defense. Colonel Gaines handed it to Grace personally. He stood inside her office at the wellness center, surrounded by the quiet hum of a space still learning how to heal. He didn't say much, just, "You'll want to sit for this?" She opened it slowly. The official language blurred as her eyes scanned the first line. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She read it again, then again. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Colonel Gaines chuckled. "That's exactly why you're getting it." The letter came with an invitation, not just to attend a ceremony in Washington, but to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference. Grace felt her knees go weak. Not a public speaker you are now. The day she left for D.C., she packed light, just one blazer, an old watch of Michael's, and the same notebook she'd used behind the cafe counter for years. Names, birthdays, notes like "Tiffany prefers tea," and "Don't ask Ray about May 15th. That notebook had carried more weight than any resume. As she waited at the airport, she heard someone call her name. "Need a ride, Miss Donnelly?" She turned to see Ray McMillan standing tall in full-dress blues, shadow calm by his side, tail gently wagging. "The base assigned me as your escort," he said with a grin. Grace laughed, half nerves, half awe. "You clean up pretty good," he smirked. "You're the one about to speak to the Pentagon." The ballroom at the conference was larger than she expected. White tablecloths, polished brass podium, cameras at every angle. Her name glowed on the screen behind her in elegant lettering. When she stepped up to the microphone, her voice was smaller than the room, but the room leaned in. "I'm not a general. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policy. Near a cafe. Near a military base. I served coffee. I listened." A pause. But in that space, I watched something sacred happen. Veterans came not for advice, but for presence. They didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be seen. People nodded. Few wiped away tears. One day, I got fired for letting a man sit with his service dog. That was the moment everything changed. But the truth is, it was never about coffee. It was about dignity. Applause thundered through the hall. Ray stood in the back. He didn't cheer. He didn't clap. He just nodded like a soldier hearing his orders finally, clearly. Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the Potomac, Grace stepped outside alone. She needed air, space, silence. A man in a gray suit with a white beard approached, quiet, kind eyes behind thin glasses. "You don't remember?" "Me, do you?" he asked. She studied his face. It stirred something. He pulled out an old photograph, grainy, faded. Her, Michael, and the older man in uniform outside the cafe, long before her husband's last deployment. "You poured me a cup of coffee the day I got my medical discharge. You didn't say anything, you just smiled. It was the first time I felt like myself again." He held out the photo. "It's yours now." She took it with trembling fingers, words caught in her throat. Back home in Mason, the town held a welcome celebration. But Grace didn't go straight there. She returned to the wellness center. It was late, quiet. A few veterans still lingered near the fire pit. She walked to the wall of photos, reached into her bag and added one Mara snapshot of the conference crowd giving her a standing ovation. Beside it, she taped the old cafe photo, the one with Michael and the soldier from long ago, and below them, she wrote a simple line: "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." As she turned to leave, a young veteran with nervous eyes stepped through the door. "Is this the place for, people like us?" Grace smiled gently. "No, son. This is the place for people like all of us." Just like that. Her circle wasn't just full, it was open, in a world that moves faster every day. It's easy to overlook the quiet moments, the soft-spoken waitress, the trembling veteran, the wag of a service dog's tail. But sometimes those moments are the ones that shape us. Grace. Donnelly didn't wear a uniform. She didn't hold rank, but she upheld something sacred: dignity. And in doing so, she reminded us all that honor isn't earned once, it's defended daily. What happened at that small cafe in Mason, Georgia, may seem like a rare story, but maybe it shouldn't be. How many Graces have we walked past without noticing? How many veterans have we thanked only with words, not actions? In today's divided world, Grace's story asks us to pause, to ask ourselves, would I have stood up like she did? Have I ever kept quiet when I should have spoken up? We want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage in your own life? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of someone else's grace. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could inspire someone else to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in quiet heroes at this channel. We tell stories that matter, stories that honor not just the uniform, but the humanity behind it, because sometimes the strongest stand doesn't come with a salute.